If you keep waking in the night and find your mind replaying the same petty fears and future anxieties, something ancient and deliberate might be the single cure you refuse to try. The old samurai did not seek to silence thought by distraction or numbing. They learned a different economy of attention, and one name stands above the rest as both exemplar and teacher: Miyamoto Musashi. Musashi taught that the mind, like a blade, must be forged and then spared the constant hammer of useless motion. His life was a study in removing everything that did not sharpen purpose. In the next minutes, you will see how a single, modern life collapses and is rebuilt along those same lines, and you will be offered precise, small practices you can hold as non-negotiables. This is not pep talk or quick strategy. It is a guided excavation of identity, habit, and solitude, drawn from Zen and Bushido. Pay attention to the shape of the practices more than the words. The form holds the instruction. Chapter 1. The Awakening. Kenji was a 34-year-old product manager who woke one morning and realized he no longer recognized the man in the mirror. His days were full of movement, meetings, and a buzzing phone that functioned as the metronome of his life. Yet, he felt hollow and reactive. He had read fragments of samurai wisdom online and admired photographs of raked gardens, but the philosophy remained ornamental until a crisis forced him to choose. After a breakup and a performance review that exposed his lack of presence, he retreated to a small cabin and committed to a month without social media, news, or casual conversation. That decision was not romantic. It was disciplinary, a surgical elimination of noise to observe what remained. In the emptiness, he encountered not peace at once, but the raw, unvarnished habits that had been running him. Chapter 2. The Discipline of Small Non-Negotiables. One of Musashi's lessons is austerity in the small things, fixed routines that become the scaffolding for the spirit. Kenji adopted 3 non-negotiable acts each morning: wake at the same hour, sit in stillness for 20 minutes, and perform one task with absolute attention until it was complete. The aim was not to produce grand results immediately, but to train the nervous system to expect fidelity to a chosen line of action. Over the first week, his mind protested with 1,000 urgencies, each masquerading as necessity. The second week, the urgencies grew thin and hollow. By the third week, the simple acts ceased to be chores and became markers of identity, proof that he belonged to himself. This is the crucial difference between habit and armor. The former is action, the latter is identity. Chapter 3. Presence as a weapon and a refuge. The samurai cultivated presence not as performance, but as a constant temperament. Presence is the refusal to be scattered by what will not serve. Kenji learned to treat attention like a sword, to draw it deliberately and to sheath it the moment a task was complete. He practiced single-pointed work on an absurdly small scale, polishing a spoon until the motion became meditation, listening to a cup of boiling water as if it carried a sermon. These small acts of presence were humiliating at first, because they revealed the mind's addiction to distraction. Yet they were effective. Presence reduced his panic by narrowing the field of possible catastrophes to the present moment, which is always the only place action is possible. In practical life, presence becomes a filter that lets only necessary inputs through, and this elimination of clutter is itself a form of mental health. Chapter 4. Silence and the Mind's Geometry. Silence is not absence, but a structure. Musashi sought silence as a means of understanding the geometry of thought. Kenji's cabin offered literal silence, but the challenge was to convert silence into comprehension rather than a vacuum to be filled. He began journaling each evening, not to vent, but to map recurring thought patterns, the same fears, the same narratives that kept him reactive. Writing, in disciplined, minimal lines, revealed the architecture of his anxieties and made them negotiable. Zen teaches that naming a thought disempowers its tyranny by moving it from the sky into the hand. In time, silence ceased to be a retreat and became a laboratory where Kenji learned to dissect impulses and choose responses grounded in clarity, not reflex. Chapter 5. The Rule of Elimination, Less as Design. Musashi's strategy often emphasized removing options to create clarity. In combat, fewer choices meant quicker, more decisive action. Kenji translated this into daily eliminations. He reduced his wardrobe to neutral pieces, limited his meals to simple nourishing foods, and cut subscriptions and tools he used only out of habit. The goal was not asceticism for its own sake, but to create a life where fewer decisions freed cognitive bandwidth for deeper work. With fewer forks in the road, his identity grew less fragmented and more decisive. The discipline of elimination allowed him to align energy with intention, transforming scattered effort into compound practice. Chapter 6. Identity over Goals. Samurai identity was cultivated as a constant, not a series of achievements to be checked off. Musashi's life showed that a warrior acts from who he is, not from what he must show. Kenji shifted his language. He stopped telling himself he was trying to be calm, and instead began to act as a calm person would, holding the door, speaking with measured tone, choosing books that shaped his mind. Language formed reality. The repeated enactment of small characteristics rebuilt his sense of self. Over months, this produced a quieter mental environment where feedback loops favored patience, deliberation, and endurance. Identity-based practice creates resilience because it removes the contingent stakes of isolated results and anchors behavior in a steady way of being. Chapter 7. Surrender and the Limits of Control. The warrior understands skillful surrender, not defeat, but the disciplined acceptance of what cannot be forced. Kenji confronted situations he could not control: a failed project, a friend's illness, the weather of life itself. He practiced surrender by acknowledging the limit of his agency and committing to his response as the only battlefield he could reliably win. This is the paradox Musashi taught. Mastery requires both rigorous action and the humility to release outcomes. Surrender is weaponized attention, a willingness to let external chaos be just that, while internal order remains intact. In the practice of surrender, anxiety loses its fuel because it no longer pretends to command the uncontrollable. Chapter 8. The Mirror of Adversity. Musashi sought challenges as tests, not punishments. He mined hardship for lessons, rather than allowing hardship to become identity. Kenji purposefully stepped into difficult conversations, cold mornings, and physical exertion to temper his nerves and reveal brittle spots. Each hardship acted as a mirror, reflecting back the exact edges of his unresolved fears and small vanities. Facing them repeatedly, with a calm method, he began to reforge his boundaries and measures. The warrior does not ask life for ease. He asks life for truth about himself. That relentless feedback loop is what builds durable mental strength, not escape, but confrontation with organized methods. Chapter 9. Presence in Relationship and Speech. Bushido insisted on restraint in speech and action. Words were economy, not abundance. Outside his cabin, Kenji practiced the discipline of spoken restraint, choosing honesty over volume, and listening as an act of service. This shifted his relationships in surprising ways. Fewer reactive comments, more precise commitments, and a steadier emotional tone that invited trust. The absence of constant talk created meaningful silences, that became connective tissue rather than voids to be filled. In the marketplace of modern noise, restraint is radical and restorative. It signals inner governance. When speech is sparing and purposeful, it becomes an instrument of alignment rather than a release valve for scattered emotion. Chapter 10. Ritual, Repetition, and the Slow Forge. The samurai cultivated ritual precisely because repetition shapes the soul. Ritual is not superstition but a daily template for becoming. Kenji established simple rituals: morning stillness, deliberate work blocks, a nightly review, and practiced them until they were automatic. These repetitions built a muscle memory of calm responses and reduced the number of existential choices he faced daily. Over a year, the small, steady rituals compounded into a different life rhythm, one where storms still came, but they found a man who moved with intention and poise. The slow forge of ritual is the only reliable path from chaotic living to a controlled interior. Chapter 11. Application, Systems, Not Willpower. Musashi fought many duels and understood that victory favors systems more than episodic courage. Kenji learned to design traps for his old self, friction for impulses, and frictionless channels for desired behaviors. He left his phone in another room during work, placed his running shoes by the door, and scheduled weekly solitude as sacred. These systems did not eliminate temptation, but they made habit change inevitable by altering context. Willpower is finite. Structure is renewable. The ancient warrior builds circumstances that render good practice the natural choice rather than a heroic exception. Conclusion: quiet power and return. After months, Kenji returned to ordinary life with a different center. His mental storms persisted at times, but each now became a trainable event rather than a takeover. He learned that the samurai's mental health did not arise from toughness alone, but from a life designed to reduce internal conflict through elimination, ritual, presence, and disciplined surrender. Miyamoto Musashi provides a map. Simplify, practice the small non-negotiables, cultivate silence, and build systems that favor integrity. If you take one instruction from this account, let it be this: choose one small, non-negotiable act today and perform it exactly the same way for 30 days. Do not seek instant peace. Seek steady remaking, and the quiet power of the warrior will arrive, patiently and without fanfare.